Okay, so today I'm very excited to introduce my colleague as well as our presenter today. So we have with us Mihaela Dirlea, and Mihaela is a social worker, psychotherapist, and qualified mindfulness instructor in Toronto. She is also a program facilitator with Wellspring Cancer Support Foundation, and she has worked with cancer survivors for the last 11 years. She has been counseling cancer survivors around challenges associated with cancer survivorship, and she has been delivering mindfulness programs for cancer survivors, staff in healthcare, graduate students, and correctional officers in the last several years. So I'm very excited to have Mihaela with us today, and I will pass it over to you for our presentation today.
Thank you, Benita. I'm also very excited to be here and thrilled to be sharing this hour with all of you. So our presentation today is about living with joy, and we'll be introducing 5 simple practices to cultivate joy in your everyday life. I would like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which I am here today is the traditional territory of the Huron, Wendat, and Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nations. And to begin, I'd like to start with a quote. This is a quote that captures the spirit of our talk today. Joy is not in things, it is in us. And the point here is that everyone has the capacity to experience joy no matter what is happening around in their life or what has recently happened. And in terms of what to expect for today, we'll be talking about joy. What is joy? What's the definition of joy? And what the different types of joy are. And also we'll be talking a little bit about neuroscience and how our brain is wired and what the common barriers are in terms of how our brain is wired to experiencing joy on a regular basis. So that's called a negativity bias. We'll be talking about another aspect of neuroscience, which is called neuroplasticity. And we'll be offering 5 practices to increase joy in your life. And we'll be closing with some strategies of how to increase your chances to make these changes last in your life and to integrate these in your life. And we'll be talking about what specific things you can do, the next steps to be integrating these practices in your life. And I'd also like to acknowledge that the presentation today is inspired by the work of Rick Hansen, Laurie Santos, Tara Brock, Joanna Macy, Eckhart Tolle, and John Kabat-Zinn. So before we launch in, I'd like to invite you to get some pen and paper. Today is not a workshop and it's not possible, right? But there will be a lot of opportunities for reflection and reflection of what kind of joy, types of joy you have in your life, what kind of barriers to joy you have in your life, and what kind of practices you'd like to take out of this. And I'm also going to be inviting you to take care of yourself. Like Benita said, if you need to get up and stretch or get a glass of water, we will be talking, about some of the barriers to joy. So sometimes that can be a topic that could maybe create an emotional reaction. So I'm just inviting you to take care of yourself and do whatever you need to do to take care of yourself. So what is joy? The American Psychological Association defines joy as a feeling of extreme gladness, delight, or exaltation of the spirit arising from a sense of well-being or satisfaction. Oops. And the different kinds of joy that I'd like to draw your attention to are hedonic joy, which is really about sense pleasure. So that's delight and joy arising from the pleasure that comes from our sensory experience. So perhaps getting a nice massage or eating our favorite food. And it's also about avoiding pain here. And on the flip side, eudaimonic joy is really about meaning and purpose. And so it's about having a fulfilled life. It's about full functioning, and it's about self-realization. So if you are someone who has a lot of meaning and purpose from your career or from your home life, For example, you gain a lot of meaning, purpose out of parenting your children, or be a grandparent to your grandchildren, or work with disadvantaged communities. This is what would fall into eudaimonic joy. And the last two categories of joy I'd like to draw your attention to is conditional joy. So the first two categories that I spoke about, hedonic and eudaimonic, are both forms of conditional joy, because that's really about taking delight in the circumstances and the things that are present. And so, for example, going for a walk with your dog and noticing the beautiful weather outside, for example, right? So that's, if you're going for a walk, then you'll experience joy. That's a form of conditional joy. If you have meaning in your life, then you'll experience joy. And the other aspect, the last type of joy, actually, that I'd like to talk about is joy independent of conditions. And this is really about the habits of our mind. And how inclined we might be to recognize opportunities for joy. This is about cultivating the neural networks of our brain to recognize opportunity for joy. And so it's not based on conditions. It's even if I cannot go for a walk, I can still be joyful. And I'd like to pay particular attention to this kind of joy, because it's not something that we speak about very often in our culture. And it might be especially relevant if you have gone through an experience like cancer, because there are a lot of opportunities to reflect on the negative aspects of your life, the loss, grief, threat and danger. And so this kind of joy might be even more interesting to explore in this time. So next, I'd like you to take a moment to reflect on what kind of joy you have most of in your life right now. What are you good at from these three kinds of joy? So perhaps you are good at scheduling daily pleasures in your life. You take a moment to enjoy your morning coffee. You take a moment to really soak in and enjoy that bath you take at the end of the day. And that would be hedonic joy. Perhaps you are someone who finds a lot of fulfillment in your life, like volunteering for a soup kitchen or things like that. That would be eudaimonic joy. Or perhaps you're someone who is practicing the muscle of joy very easily. And chances are that might not be the case if you're attending this talk. So, this last kind of joy independent conditions might be, finding it easy to notice the joy that comes from noticing that gentle sun on your face throughout the day. I want to say that none are better than the other. There's no hierarchy of joy. They're all different aspects of our experience of joy. So take a moment to reflect and perhaps note down what kind of joy is easy for you to notice in your life. And as a second reflection, I'd like to ask you to reflect on what kind of joy is missing most in your life. Perhaps you're someone who benefits from making time, who might benefit from making time from small indulgences. So that would be hedonic joy. Perhaps you're someone who can grow on the meaning front. After cancer, I find working with people who've gone through cancer, there is often people kind of use it as a way to draw a line in the sand, say this is the kind of thing I would like to still have in my life, or these are the kind of people I would like to surround myself with, and these are the kind of values that I'd like to live closer to. So there is often an opportunity to really explore meaning and purpose. Or perhaps, you're someone who could benefit a lot from strengthening your muscle of seeing joy or seeing opportunities for joy. So the 5 practices we'll be talking about today correlate to these different kinds. So just take a moment to note which ones are missing most in your life, or which ones you'd like to work on. Which one might be a good place to start? And perhaps pay particular attention then to the 5 practices and how we relate to them, and pay more attention to the one that that relates to the kind of joy that you'd like to work on. So we'll move on to talk about neuroscience and the way our brain is wired. And we'll talk about the negativity bias. This is basically one of the barriers to why it's not necessarily easy for us to see a lot of joy and to experience a lot of joy in our lives. And it's basically the idea that our mind is Velcro for negative and Teflon for positive. It's the idea that we attend to and learn and use negative information far more than positive information. And this also has an evolutionary aspect to it. It made evolutionary sense for us to do that, that our brain reacts more to negative than to positive. For example, evolutionary speaking, the sight of a tiger, you know, for our ancestors, the sight of a tiger in the woods or a bear was a lot more important to quickly respond to, because it could be a threat to our life. Then, you know, for example, the experience of a refreshing summer rain of our skin, right? So our system is trained and is wired to react much stronger to negative stimulation and information than it is to positive, and that is one of the reasons for that is evolution. It also means that we learn faster from pain. So once burned, twice shy. Our painful experiences are more memorable. So perhaps some of you might remember, you know, very clearly the time you went to the hospital and received the cancer diagnosis, but you might not remember the coffee you had that morning, right? It's the way our brain is wired. It also means that we work harder to avoid losing something. So we might work harder to kind of regain our strength after a difficult experience. Harder than we would, for example, becoming fit from a place of full health. And just to give you an idea about how much stronger negative stimulation is than positive in terms of the impact it has on our brain. In a relationship, research shows that it takes 5 positive experiences to make up for 1 negative experience. And this research comes from looking at couples and the success of the romantic relationship, the satisfaction in the romantic relationship, and the longevity of that relationship. And so what was found was that couples that end up staying together and have high satisfaction in their relationships have this ratio of 5 positive experiences. So 5 moments of connection, love, care, to 1 negative experience, to one moment of conflict or 1 conflict. And this negativity bias is also culturally reinforced. You know, when we look at how we look at education, oftentimes we are asked to develop the skill of critical thinking and to dissect and decompose systems, rather than being asked to see what works well or what the solution might be. Another way in which this negativity bias might show up, so you might be able to recognize it, is this thing called problem mode. So I'm going to do a little exercise here. So I'm going to ask you to try not to think of a pink elephant. Okay. So what do you think of first? Chances are a pink elephant. And this is because when we are in problem mode, we are allocating our attentional resources to the problem itself. So even though we're trying to stay away from the negative, because we are paying attention to negative, that's what gets soaked in, right, into our nervous system. We might recognize this when if you're someone who has the propensity to catastrophize, to think about what's the worst thing that could happen in the future, or if you're struggling with fear of recurrence or cancer progression. I work with a lot of people who are struggling with that, and so that's one way in which problem mode shows up, because you know, our brain and our mind is interpreting uncertainty as danger, And so we're focused on the problem, even though the problem might be in the future or might never happen. But because our attention is on the problem, that's what we experience. So that's part of the negativity bias. And another way to recognize negativity bias is discontent mode. And this is the idea of, if only the weather would be nicer outside, I'd be happier. If only I was able to stretch, I'd be more content. If only I had that glass of water right now, I'd be okay. The good news is that our brain is changeable. This also comes from neuroscience, and it's how our brain is wired. Our mind, I would like to kind of invite you to the possibility of our mind being like a muscle. If you think of when you first try to draw a straight line, it was very difficult as a toddler. And but the more you did it, the easier it became. And now it's automatic, chances are, right? That it's easy to draw a straight line because you've done it so much that the muscle memory is there, right? And our mind shapes the brain. So what we pay attention to actually really matters. And whatever we think about becomes a habit of our mind. So we cannot stop our brain from changing. The question is, do we like the changes? Is this more of what we'd like to see in our lives? And whatever we practice gets stronger. So again, kind of that idea of drawing a straight line, the more you practice it, the easier it is. And it eventually becomes part of how you automatically relate to the world. And this is relevant because the 5 practices we'll be offering today are using this neuroplasticity of our brain to our advantage, to change the wiring of our brain so that there is more opportunity for joy, not only now, but in the future as well. So just to kind of summarize everything I've said so far, what does this actually mean? That our autopilot is biased on the negative, so that's called a negativity bias. We can change our mental habits, so that is called neuroplasticity. And we need to be intentional about changing our mental habits, and those are the 5 practices that we'll be talking about. So let's practice. The first practice we'll be talking about relates to the first kind of joy that I mentioned, which is hedonic joy, which is about sense pleasures. And it's simply about taking pleasure. So researchers actually suggest that we know ourselves, our own signature of what brings us pleasure and joy. So it's simply naming, maybe writing down a list of what brings you sensory pleasure, what smells good, what tastes delicious, what looks beautiful, what sounds lovely, and what feels great on your skin. The key here is really about savoring it and taking delight. So not only having that favorite food, but really just taking it in and giving yourself a few, good seconds to experience it and to like it. It's not, this practice is not really about denying the hardship and the painful experiences that have happened, but it's about opening ourselves up to the possibilities of joy that are there in the background or can be there already. And another positive thing about doing these kind of practices is that it not only increases our mood and reduces our fear and our stress, but it also has positive impacts on our health system and on our health, and so it improves immune response, it improves digestion, and regulates hormones and balances hormones. And these practices don't have to be really big. I'll give you an example here. They can be very simple and small. The idea is that we really are intentional about it and that we savor it and we soak it in. And we'll be talking a little bit more about that and how to do that. But this is a list of 15 small things that can bring one joy. It could be petting your cat. And again, you can pet your cat automatically and think of all the problems you have and how to solve them and how, what you need to cook for dinner and what next you need to solve. Or you could be petting your cat and paying attention to the softness of the fur and the warmth of their body and the joy you get from doing that activity. So it's really about our perspective, our intention, and allowing ourselves to savor it. And if you have a hard time coming up with that list, and we all have kind of our own signature barriers to that, and some people that I've worked with, almost there's a part of them that have a superstition that if only they let their guard down, something bad is going to happen. If only they allow themselves to be happy and to be joyful, something bad will happen. And so sometimes that can be really hard. That can make it really hard for us to come up with an example, to even give ourselves permission, right, to enjoy our sensory pleasures. So I'm offering a few examples here of activities that you can do that physiologically stimulate some of the happiness hormones. And so the first hormone is serotonin. So it's a hormone and a neurotransmitter that regulates mood, sleep, appetite, digestion, learning, and memory. And these are two activities that will increase serotonin in your body. So that's spending 15 minutes outside and getting a nice massage. The second happiness hormone is called dopamine, and sometimes it's referred to as the feel-good hormone. It's involved in our reward system and also in addictions. So two activities that would increase that would be eating your favorite food and listening to the music that you enjoy. The third happiness hormone is called oxytocin, and this is also called the love hormone because it is involved in bonding, so parent-child bonding. And some of the activities that increase oxytocin in our system are getting hugs and giving hugs and cuddling our pets. And the last one is our endorphins, and these are the natural painkiller of our bodies. So when we exercise, that increases, and when we laugh for a long time, that increases. So here are some activities, just in case you are stuck with that list and you'd like to try it. We'll move on to the next practice, and this will relate to the second kind of joy that I mentioned. And so that's the eudaimonic kind of joy, and that's about meaning and purpose. And this practice is practicing acts of kindness. So my invitation to you would be to choose, if you choose to kind of try this one out, to choose one a day. And you can do it to strangers, or you can, offer it to loved ones, or even to people you don't like or feel threatened by, or even to pets. And it's simple things that don't require a lot of time commitment, like giving a compliment or smiling to others or not being in a rush or listening mindfully. Smiling to others actually has a lot of really beautiful benefits. And so research shows that just a physiological movement of the muscles when we smile sends signals to the brain, even if we smile when we're not happy. Just the act of smiling sends signals to our brain that increase the positive outlook and evaluation. So it will make us see the world in a more positive way. And it's also emotionally contagious. So not only does it help us feel and act better, but it also allows others to feel and act better. And sometimes we notice that in the opposite way, like, you may have had the experience where you entered a room and you noticed that there was an energy of anger and upset before you even had a chance to check in with the person who was in the room who was angry and upset. You might have noticed kind of the energy, right? So it's true for positive and negative as well. So this practice is really about connection, altruism, and meaning and purpose. Acts of kindness will increase our sense of social connection, and we know that social isolation has very detrimental effects on our stress and our health. It reduces longevity and it reduces happiness. And some researchers compare the health outcomes of social isolation to smoking cigarettes. So they compare it to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. And some people even say that it's twice as the health detriments on our physical and mental health are twice as bad as living with obesity. So social isolation can be a really big, it can have a really big negative impact on our health. So doing acts of kindness can be a way to kind of maintain our social connection. Giving is more than receiving. So there's research that shows that altruism increases happiness and well-being and longevity, so we live longer. And the only caution to that would be if you have compassion fatigue, if you're getting burned out by giving, and you're not taking time to fill your own cup. And lastly, this practice is, as I mentioned, about meaning and purpose as well. It might be a clue to what is meaningful to you. So if you find yourself kind of gravitating towards practices that are with children or with pets or around food security, right? Volunteering in a food kitchen or something like that, that might be a clue to what is actually really valuable and important to you. So maybe if you're having a hard time knowing exactly kind of what might bring you meaning and purpose at this point in your life, doing this practice might give you a clue. So just taking a moment to let that all sink in. And we'll be moving to the last kind of joy, which is joy independent of conditions. And that, again, is about the habits of the mind. It's building and strengthening that muscle to notice opportunities for joy. It's about wiring the brain to recognize joy. And this is not about events or circumstances that have or haven't happened. It's really about a way of being. It's a way of relating to the world and to our present moment. So these next three practices will be relating to this kind of joy. And so the first of these three practices is savoring spontaneous pleasant experiences. So again, they don't have to be big. It can be something very small and subtle, like noticing the sun on your face through the window on a winter day. But the key is to notice positive experiences as they happen and then savor them. And savor them for 20 or 30 seconds or 5 to 8 breaths, perhaps noticing the positive body sensations that go with that, the positive emotions, the positive thoughts. And it's very important. This step is really, really important because the more we give attention, again, that idea of neuroplasticity, we want to give attention and spend a little bit of time with that, the easier it will become for that information and that experience to be committed to our long-term memory. So it'll be easier to access later. It'll be easier, that muscle will be built stronger. And the last step here is to let this experience become part of your self-concept. So allow yourself to just think of yourself as a person who can enjoy this, and just allowing that to simmer for you as who you are. And again, these experiences don't have to be big. They can be just slightly pleasant. And Rick Hansen, who developed this practice, is actually recommending to do this about half a dozen times a day. And it only takes 30 seconds. It could be, noticing the pleasant sensation of water on your skin as you're washing the dishes. It could be noticing the sound of birds that you didn't expect. It doesn't have to be very long. Other part of this practice is savoring things to be glad about. So these are things that not necessarily happen spontaneously, but you can be glad about them. So perhaps bad things that never happened. And again, taking 20, 30 seconds to let that soak in and notice the positive body sensations, emotions, and thoughts that come with that. Perhaps it's, fears around COVID, fears about being infected with COVID that never happened, or perhaps there was COVID, but it wasn't as bad as expected. Relief that hard times are over. Perhaps, we can be glad about some difficult health things that we had to get through, or maybe parts of the treatments are done and we can be glad about that. Good things that have happened in the past. So perhaps, getting a compliment or having a chance to spend time with our children, or quality time with our children or grandchildren. And again, these things are not to deny the hard things that have happened and the painful things that can be part of life, but it's really just to build that muscle, to give ourselves the opportunity to also see, to also experience joy, even though there is pain and hardship otherwise. And the other piece here is, so a moment when someone expressed gratitude for your actions. So that could be your practice. Maybe someone thanked you for something you did that you weren't even aware about. And also take the opportunity to share with other people about something you're pleased with, because that can kind of really amplify your experience of joy. And again, the key thing is to take 20, 30 seconds to savor it. So let's try that now, actually. Pick one of these categories and let's take 20, 30 seconds to just allow that to simmer. Just noticing the positive body sensations, emotions, perhaps positive thoughts that come with that. And just checking in with yourself to see what this was like. How do you feel now after doing this? Is this easy? Is this hard? Were you able to tap into joy or not? So we'll be moving into the next practice, which is authentic gratitude. And this is often people talk about gratitude as a way, as a daily practice, or as kind of an answer to discontent. And I want to draw the caution that it's not I should be grateful for this, because I've seen lots of people getting stuck in that. That I should be great. Oh, I have lots of things to be grateful for, so I shouldn't be allowing myself to experience the bad things or the hard emotions. That's not the point. The point is to also lean into that, and it needs to be authentic. So if it's something that you really truly feel thankful and grateful for, that's this practice. It needs to be authentic. So taking a moment, these are invitations, but you can come up with your own kind of prompts. But taking a moment to think about or write down these 5 things. Some things I love about being alive on Earth are a place that was magical or wonderful to me as a child was. A person who helped me believe in myself is or was. Some things I enjoy doing and making are. And some things I appreciate about myself are. So that's the practice of authentic joy. So if you've had a chance to kind of think, maybe just checking in with yourself to see what that was like. And the last practice we'll be talking about today is practicing enoughness. And this is especially helpful if you find yourself, if you find out for you that negativity bias shows up as discontent mode. That idea of, if only, you know, it was nicer out, I'd be happy. Practicing enoughness can be a really profound practice, actually, and experience. So it might just look like in asking yourself the question, in what ways is this moment enough? In what ways am I a good enough mother or sister or partner? In what ways is my body satisfied? I'm not hungry or not in pain or not nauseous. And what does that enoughness feel like in my body? Sometimes this content mode is disguised in this cloak of virtuous or honorable things. So sometimes we strive towards being kinder and more compassionate and nicer. We feel like we're not nice enough, not good enough, not compassionate enough. And so the invitation here would be to ask yourself, what will allow me to give myself permission to acknowledge that I am enough? Kind enough, compassionate enough, nice enough. Nothing else is needed, and just savoring that, right? And the last invitation in this practice might be to celebrate a small accomplishment. What can I celebrate right now? Perhaps it's attending this talk or making time to reflect on joy in your life and to take care of yourself in some ways. Just building in those small celebrations as well. So those are the 5 practices, and we'll move into talking about some strategies to increase the chances to make these experiences last and be integrated into your nervous system, into your, you know, to increase the chance that neuroplasticity is working, and that we give the opportunity for the brain to physiologically change and build that muscle of joy. So the first piece here is engaged attention. So it might, engaged attention is bringing the quality of fascination and awe and curiosity to our attention. It might not be the kind of attention, the passive attention we use to watch a movie or even listen to a talk like this. It's really about being fascinated and curious. So when if you are taking a chance, if you are taking a moment to try those practices, see if you can really bring that curiosity and fascination to the practice. The next strategy is repetition. So thinking about, again, our mind as a muscle. If we are trying to learn how to play the piano, the more we practice, the more we repeat, the easier it will become. And bilateral stimulation is a strategy that comes from EMDR, which is a form of trauma psychotherapy. And using bilateral stimulation does the same thing. So it helps this positive information be integrated into our nervous system more. So it will help, later will help us remember it easier and then build the neural networks for it to be experienced more easily in the future as well. And so there's 3 kinds I'm going to present here. The first one is eye movements. So it looked like when you are experiencing, let's say, a spontaneous moment of joy, perhaps closing your eyes and allowing your eyeballs to move left, right, left, right, left, right, left, right, underneath your eyelids. And what this does is stimulates both sides of the brain to integrate the information better. We know this works because there's lots of research out there on EMDR. If you don't want to do the eye movements, you can do a butterfly tap, which is basically crossing your wrists in front of your chest and tapping on your shoulders. So let's say you notice the gentle, pleasant sensations of the sun shining on your face. You could just be doing this and soaking it in. Or if you don't want to do that, you could tap on your knees, the same way. So it's really alternating left and right sides of the body so that you can stimulate both sides of the brain. And that's about the pace you want to do it at, as I demonstrated. And you want to do it maybe 4 to 6 times. So left, right is one set. So you want to do that 4 to 6 times. Some other tools and small tricks to kind of increase the success of integrating these experiences is giving yourself permission. So I often see people, again, struggling with barriers of maybe not giving themselves permission, having this kind of limiting belief that if I let myself, let my guard down, something bad will happen. So giving yourself permission as an intentional practice can be a really profound paradigm shift, actually. And setting your intention. So practicing that choice, and so stepping out of autopilot, which is the negativity bias, right? Where it's more biased on negative, stepping out of that and setting the intention to practice. And sometimes people use a to-be list as they do their to-do list as a way to set their intentions. So you might, that's one strategy that you can use. I have to buy these groceries, but my intention for today is also to experience joy or to be kind. Sometimes saying yes means actually saying no. So if you're choosing to do, let's say, a practice in the morning, a gratitude practice in the morning, it might mean that you have to cut out something else in your life. It might just mean that you're sleeping 5 minutes less. And starting small. So just choosing one practice to set ourselves up for success and to be able to celebrate that we have made a change towards something that we're working towards. And for those of us who struggle with perfectionism, starting again. So if you notice that you didn't end up doing the practice you wanted to do, it's okay, just start again. Every moment is a new opportunity. The key is the present moment. Discontent and problems often are not actually in the present moment. But joy and gratitude and contentment are in the present moment. So how we relate to the present moment and whether we choose to see and how we relate to it, right? Like if we choose to see the opportunities for joy, that then becomes a habit. And if you find it really hard to be in the present moment, mindfulness can be a really useful practice. So again, to summarize, our autopilot is biased on the negative. So that's called the negativity bias. We can change our mental habits. That is called neuroplasticity. And we need to be intentional about it. And these are 5 practices that you can use to do that. And here are the 5 practices again. So taking pleasure, acts of kindness, savoring pleasant experiences, authentic gratitude, and finding enoughness. And before we close, I'd like to invite you to take a moment to reflect on what stands between you and joy. Each of us have kind of our own signature barriers. Perhaps it's a lack of meaning and purpose. In that case, you can consider reflecting on that or doing some life coaching or sort of psychotherapy. Perhaps you find that there isn't enough time in the day. And maybe then the practice of setting the intention might be helpful. Perhaps it's loneliness that stands between you and joy, and then the invitation might be to explore opportunities for connection. Perhaps it's self-criticism or negative self-talk. An invitation might be to explore self-compassion. Perhaps you find yourself being on autopilot a lot. And so then mindfulness can be a helpful practice. So just taking a moment to reflect. And to close this talk today, we'll be supporting you in choosing your next steps. So perhaps choosing one practice that stands out to you from today. Perhaps it's something that is related to the kind of joy you were lacking most at the beginning of the presentation that you made note of, or one of the barriers that you just reflected on. So choosing one practice and thinking about how and when you see yourself doing it. So why does it speak to you? How does it fit in your life? When do you see yourself doing it? Is it structured? Like you want to do it in the morning, or would you like to kind of just do it throughout the day? And what would help remind you? Is there something that could help remind you to do this and to try this? Perhaps setting an alarm on your phone, or a sticky note, or sticky notes around your house, or wearing a new piece of jewelry, or setting the intention that every time you go through the doorway, you remember joy. So what would help remind you? And to close today's presentation, I'd like to share this beautiful quote with you. Participate joyfully in the sorrows of the world. We cannot cure the world of sorrows, but we can choose to live in joy. And that's by Joseph Campbell. So that's the end of my talk today.